So glad that you're with us and joining us and gathering online. And we're in our series, Irresistible Church, and we're actually wrapping it up this week. And the whole heart of the series is aimed at looking at those characteristics of the early church that made it irresistible and going back to those as much as we possibly can. And we're doing a different format, all discussion based. And this week I'm joined by Tessa Galindo, who's our lead pastor's assistant. And everything that you see the teaching team do, she's the one that makes sure it happens. And so, Tessa, this week you're stepping out from behind the scenes, kind of on this side of things and stepping out of your comfort zone. So thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And a couple of weeks ago, when Eileen and I were talking in this series, we kind of talked about the craziness that this season has been kind of in our house with 4 kids. But I know you have 3 kids, a deployed husband. What has this season of quarantine looked like for you?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's been interesting. Man, it started off with having to do homeschooling. I don't even have the patience to help my kids with homework. So that idea of having to actually become their teacher was really hard. After a while, we kind of fell into our groove of things. And eventually, my kids, I think they were tired of being on their Chromebooks all the time. So they started asking to do no technology weekends. So we started
Mm.
doing that. And we just had fun, like playing games, swimming, puzzles, dances, whatever they wanted to do. And I felt like it just grew us a lot in that season. We grew together a lot and it was a lot of fun. And in fact, I've had a little more
Hmm.
anxiety going back into normal than I did going into the season because I don't want to lose that togetherness and that bond that we've grown in.
Hmm. And it's neat hearing your perspective, and I know there are many that can relate to that feeling of being brought together, and yet kind of that sentiment when you look at social media right now, it is a hotbed of division. I mean, there's a whole lot of back and forth about this, that, and the other, and especially with everything going on with the coronavirus, and you can laugh the whole situation off. You can look on social media and see a meme and laugh it all off. You can read an article that basically scares you to death, and then it's followed by a blog post talking about that article and how the author of that article is an idiot. So there's
Yeah.
just a lot of perspectives back and forth. When this all started, did you think this is where we'd get?
No, not at all. Initially, when it all started, it felt like we were actually very unified. Like it felt like our nation was unified. It felt like the world was
Hmm.
unified because we all had one common enemy, and that was coronavirus. So it felt like we were all fighting this enemy and we were all
Hmm.
in it together. And then very quickly, it we just began to feel that division. It was like, well, if you're outside of your house, you're an idiot. What are you doing? If you're staying in your house, what are you doing? If you're wearing a mask, what are you doing? If you're not wearing a mask, and just this division, people started picking sides,
Hmm.
and it just feels like the all of that unity that was there for a minute, it just was completely gone.
Hmm. And kind of what you're pointing to, what we're kind of getting at is that so many, I think when I look at the situation, so many of these divisions are caused by labels and preferences and just and this is also we're gearing up for a political season coming up on top of all that too. And so you've got these labels of conservative or liberal or moderate and all these things and all of our preferences of we think it should be this way or that way, they just tend to being really divisive. And it seems like it's kind of always been that way. It's not anything new necessarily under the sun. And there's part of me that's really encouraged by that because that's exactly the scene that Jesus stepped into was so much division. And yet he had this tremendous ability to bring people together. And so that's what gets me really hopeful that if he was able to do that then he'll be able to do that today because he's the same God that is yesterday and today. And when we think of the early church, one of the things that Jesus did that was just so unique and so special is bringing all of these different Jewish religious groups together, and he invited them all to follow him. Slaves and slave owners and free people were all part of the same community. Women were given by Jesus that intrinsic value and rights that were always theirs, and he brought them up alongside with men in a community and kind of a culture that didn't see them as equals. He took tax collectors who cheated people and the people that were cheated, and he said, "Follow me." Roman soldiers and the people they oppressed, he brought them all together. even as followers, and this is something that you and I have talked about, and it's kind of funny, but even as followers, he has this guy, Matthew, who's a tax
Mhm.
collector. I mean, you can imagine them sharing what they did before they followed Jesus. And Matthew's like, I was a tax collector. And he's like, Simon, what did you do? He's like, well, I was part of a group of people that looked to get rid of tax collectors. He's like, and you guys are part of the same small group. Let's get going. So I just think it's a neat thing that all of these different groups of people were brought into this unique and deep relationship with Jesus and to connect to each other through Jesus. I think is just a really powerful thing.
Mhm.
And that was the beauty of the early church. When you think about your church experience kind of growing up, how does it stack up with that? Is that what you experienced?
No, mine was very different.
Mhm.
I grew up in the church. I grew up going Sunday mornings, Sunday nights, Wednesdays. I also went to school at the church that I went to. So I was there 6 days, sometimes 7 days a week. I had a really strong faith, so I was always very connected
Hmm.
to Jesus. But around 13, I started to just notice this divide between what people were saying and what they were doing. I felt like they would say that they love Jesus and they follow Jesus, but over here they would be doing something else, or they would be treating people a different way
Hmm.
than they were saying that Jesus said that they would, or they would be living behind closed doors a different way, but showing up to church in a certain way. And so I struggled with believing that if people really believed that Jesus could change them, that they would actually live a different life. And I just wasn't sure if people could actually change. And throughout high school, too, I tried other churches and I felt like I saw the same kind of hypocrisy.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until I had my first baby that I realized I was missing church. There was just kind of a gap there that I felt like I was missing something. I didn't know what it
Hmm.
was. Before that, I didn't feel like I needed community. I was like, I can pray. I don't need fake people in my life. I can have a connection with Jesus and I can pray, and that will be enough. But once I had the baby and I felt that gap and I just wanted to go back to church, I would still look at people and I would wonder, are they really living out what they are saying they are?
Hmm.
As they're at church and they have their hands in their air, and they're praising God, are they actually living that out at home and on the side? Do they actually believe that? Are they actually treating people in the way that they are saying that you should treat people? And I struggled with believing that people could change.
Hmm. Part of your story as you're sharing it, I mean, what you're kind of pointing at is the kind of masks that you in the church we can kind of see people wear at times. That kind of hypocrisy was a
Mm-hmm.
turn off for you. And when I think of your experience and kind of compare it to my experience growing up in the church, and I think I was probably one of the people that would have really frustrated you. I was kind of trapped and stuck in legalism, and it's legalism is those boxes that you check in order to be in. It's the things that you do, it's the things that you don't do. But as a whole, legalism really champions those labels and it really champions those preferences, and that's just what I grew up with. And I think about it, it's like people in the people in the church that I grew up with, if they did this, if they didn't do this, if they had this position on this issue or this opinion on this theological question, they were in. And those are all labels, and those can be really destructive. And I didn't see it till after I got out of that environment. But the other thing that I think about too that legalism meant for me is just, you know, growing up, I had these preferences of this is people who were godly, this is what they did, this is how they lived. But I realized those were my preferences, and what those turned into was an attitude that says if you want to come to the cross, you have to be this cleaned up first. And I realized, like, now I can't. There were people that showed up at the church I grew up to desperate for something different, and what they got was probably a cold shoulder. It was a turnoff, and it was all labels and preferences. And I know that's not the heart of God. And there was just something about it that just didn't set well with me even at the time. I just didn't know what it was
Mm-hmm.
until later on. When you think about your story, that kind of struggle looking at that hypocrisy that does exist, how were you able to find your way back to faith, the church, Jesus? What did that journey back look like for you?
It took some time. I had to be in the church for a while, and I really had to just meet some people who had genuine faith so I could see that it was possible
Hmm.
that you could live out what you say that you believe. And yeah, it just took those people guiding me back and also realizing that everybody's broken. Everybody has a brokenness to them. And I believe that people have a desire to change
Hmm.
and that Jesus can change them. I believe that now. At the time, I wasn't sure if that
Hmm.
was true or not. And I think that a lot of people are probably like you, where they thought they were doing the right thing. You know, if somebody comes in and they're saying you can't get divorced because it's against the Bible says you can't get divorced, and you're believing, but that's not true, then there's going to be a divide in that.
Hmm.
But you feel like, no, I'm living out the right way. And the person that's going through it is just struggling
Hmm.
a little bit more. Um, yeah, and I also realized that I don't think that Jesus discriminates. I don't think that when he went and invited Matthew to come follow him, that he was like, "Hey, Matthew, follow me." But wait, are you going to change? Are you going to clean yourself up? Are you going to actually be the person that I need you to be in order to follow me?
Hmm.
And at the same time, he had Judas on in his like intimate circle.
Hmm.
He had a friendship with Judas, who he knew was going to betray him, who he knew was going to steal from him, and he still invited him in. And that's encouraging to me. And when Jesus died on the cross, I don't think that he was up there like, do these people really deserve this? You know, should I be doing this for them right now? Are they going to clean themselves up? Are they actually going to
Hmm.
change? I don't think he was thinking that. In fact, I know he wasn't because he said, "Father, please forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." And I don't think that prayer was just for the people who are physically harming him. I
Hmm.
think that prayer was for all of us who are trying to do the best we can, all of those us who have turned away from him or not given him a chance or had, you know, one foot in the world and one foot in the church too.
Hmm. What I really appreciate about hearing that part of your story is it seems like what was a game changer for you was coming face to face with the love of Jesus. You began to see it, and you began to live that out, and you began to see that for other people too. And I know we're coming at it from different perspectives. On the one hand, that hypocrisy was frustrating to you, and for me, I was kind of trapped in this legalism. But it was the same love of God. It was the same love of Christ that drew me out. Because I think when we think about legalism, and this is, and not to create like a whole bunch of empathy, and the New Testament, it's one of the things that Jesus, those people that check all the boxes and thinks that's what makes them right with God. That's often the thing that Jesus he gets frustrated. It seems like he gets frustrated with a little bit, and he addresses and confronts quite often. But I think being someone who is stuck in it, I think it gets a we look at those people and think, man, they have such a judgmental spirit. And I think it's easy to forget that for those people that are trapped and stuck in that judgmental spirit, all that judgment is pointed at them first. They're their own worst enemies. They victimize themselves first. And so I remember growing up, never feeling like I was going to be good enough, never feeling like I could do enough to be acceptable. I was exhausted and there was no peace in that. And so I'm living life this way. And so I get to college and I've got two different masks, right? I mean, it's an exhausting thing, but I still play the game. I still played the game. And I lived in fear that my circle of friends in this sphere of my life and this sphere of my life over here would see who I really was. I was just terrified of that. And so at one point I'm thinking like, I don't need to do this anymore. I don't need to feel this guilt and shame. I want to be a whole person, either totally in or totally out, but I just want to be a whole person. And I thought I was going to be out because I just couldn't do what I felt like God wanted me to do. I just didn't feel like I had the power. And it turns out I really didn't. And it was by God's grace at just that right time that he brought a irresistible community to me. And they accepted me, they took me as I was, but they said, but together we're going to go after something better, something greater. And they invited me along. And really, I got to live out this new life and I got to see them live it out first. And I saw it and I was like, that's what I want. If that's what true faith looks like, that's what I'm after. That's what I've got to have. And what I think's neat about that is that the Apostle Paul speaks to this in a letter to the church in Corinth. He writes this in 2 Corinthians 5. He says Christ's love controls us. Since we believe that Christ died for all, we also believe that we have all died to our old life. He died for everyone so that those who receive this new life will no longer live for themselves. Instead, they will live for Christ who died and was raised for them. And there's just something beautiful about if he died for all, then all have died. So no matter our distinctions, no matter our differences, we have that in common. He says we go after this new life, our old labels, they're gone. We have a new life with a new master, a new leader, a new Lord, and he leads us in the same direction. And that's in a direction of his love. And I think that's what's neat from the beginning of the church, the beauty of it, the joy of it. It was always the love of Christ that has the power to bring us together. So when you see what our faith can be like, what it can look like, what the love of God does, what struggles do you think that the church needs to overcome today to go after that?
Um, I've worked at the church long enough now to see why people leave the church, and a lot of it comes down to personal preferences.
Hmm.
A lot of times it's maybe somebody wants control. They don't like how the preacher teaches or prays. They don't like the music. It's very rarely theological or biblical or based on anything that we believe or that we teach that we believe is biblically true.
Hmm.
It's usually personal preferences. The one that makes me the most sad is people who leave not feeling cared for. And in this instance, I mean, when they come to the church and maybe it's their first time, maybe it's their third time, and they leave and they don't come back and they say, nobody said hi to me. And Randy tells a great story of this of two families showing up. One of them is brand new and they sit down, and the other one is brand new and they sit down next to this group together.
Hmm.
And this family over here is saying, how come nobody's saying hi to me? Why isn't this family over here saying hi to me? And this family saying, why isn't this family over here saying hi to me? This church is so unfriendly. And they leave thinking that everybody's unfriendly. And I think people forget that we're a church of 700 to 1,000.
Hmm.
We have 4 services. But I think in those instances, it's people are looking to their own preferences and they're looking at what they want from the church, not what they want to give. And so, we try to encourage everybody to say hi to everybody, no matter how long you've been here. And that's a little bit of a side note. But I think that the way to combat the preferences
Hmm.
and the division inside of the church also is to submit everything to Jesus. I think if you and I have a division, if we're divided on a topic, biblical, moral, something, that Jesus can speak on, I think we come together, we say, let's pray on it, let's go to the Bible, let's think about it, and then let's come back together, because Jesus isn't going to show me something that different than he's going to show you. If we're asking
Hmm.
a question about marriage, he's not going to say, Justin, here's this about marriage. Tessa, here's this about marriage. I believe he's going to unify us in our thoughts on those things, because that's what Jesus does. And he says that he is the way, the truth, and the life. So of course we need to seek him, and we have to let him unite us in those thoughts.
Hmm. So much of what you're pointing at, and I appreciate it's coming out in some of your story that you're sharing, is just these labels and preferences that could be so divisive. And we've talked a little bit about those labels, especially in this political season that we're in, or these viewpoints that we have to have. But these preferences, there is just something to be said about when you want this and I want this, or we think we should go at this situation, or we think we should do this completely different. We have preferences of what we think would be best. And yet, if you and I both look at Jesus and just say, okay, what do you want for us? Then his preferences get to trump both of ours. And I think that's really neat and empowering, because it's like, okay, I want this, but you want this, but he wants that. Okay. And we get to go after that together. That's a really unifying thing. And something that I think is really cool is that this unity comes through the new life that Jesus offers. When the church lets go of labels of our old life and goes after that new life, we're able to let go of those labels, and we get to let go of our preferences and make Jesus's preferences and his priorities our priorities. And there's something that's just so neat about that. Often, anytime we see disunity, it's because somebody's preferences are given an opportunity to rise above Jesus's. And I think that can't happen. Um, and what we're talking about, this struggle of labels and preferences and just potential division that breaks down unity in the church, I am reassured that the early church fought for this too and struggled with it. In fact, in Acts 10, there's a really cool story of the Apostle Peter. And I think this is so encouraging because Jesus is tapping him on the shoulder and says, I'm going to build my church on you. You're going to lead it, man. The gates of hell won't prevail against it. Or you're going to go after this. And Acts 10 rolls around, and the early churches, they're all Jewish converts to become followers of Jesus. They're all Jewish converts to Christianity. They haven't even gone after the non-Jewish or Gentile community. And God speaks to Peter in a dream and says, "You, what I'm going after, I'm going after all people. So you got to not just be about your clique, not be just about the Jewish community. You need to go after the non-Jews." And Peter struggles with that, but he eventually does. And he gets there, shares the good news of Jesus, and he says, I can see that God shows no favoritism. Who he is calling, this is a really rough paraphrase, but who he's calling, he is calling. And there's just something so empowering knowing that the early church struggled with it and they came out on the other side. But that there's just something that's encouraging, and what it helps me understand in my story is just if anyone in Christ is a new creation, who am I to disagree with that? And who am I to call into question those that God has called to himself? That's not a church that's not a church that loves the way Jesus loved. And that's not what he's calling us to go after and be. In all that we've talked about and setting aside and laying down these labels and preferences and going after together that new life that Jesus promises and offers and promises will bring us together. When you think and dream about what the church could look like now, what do you see?
Yeah, I think about Acts 4. In Acts 4, it says that all believers were united in heart and mind. And that is just such a cool thought to me. I can't
Hmm.
imagine being united in heart and mind with even one person. So for all believers to be that united is just really awesome. They were so united that there weren't any needs amongst them. If anybody had a need, somebody would sell what they had. They would sell their land. And at that time, if you had land, it was generationally passed down,
Hmm.
or you had enough money to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
So for you to turn around and sell your land to make sure that people could have what they needed, that's huge.
Hmm.
And they had no needs amongst them, and I can't even imagine what that would look like. Um, I know that that would be a completely irresistible church, and
Hmm.
that's a church that I would love to be a part of. When I think about what it could potentially look like, it would be, um, homeless and abused people coming to our church, knowing that they could be cared for here. And ultimately, we would be the epicenter
Hmm.
of the solution. We would be the
Mm-hmm.
solution.
Yeah.
And as believers come together and we provide for the needs, because we can't eradicate all homelessness. I wish we could.
Hmm.
If everybody was a believer, we could, but there's always going to be sin in the world. That's kind of just the way it is. But we have a great example of what this looks like on a smaller scale.
Hmm.
Our church cancels services once a year so that we can do Project Serve. And that's where we all go to the neighborhood behind our church. And at that time, we are all unified in one heart and one mind so that we can all accomplish one mission. And we get to bless those people, and we get to bless the people in our church because they get to serve. And it's just such a cool thing. And when I think about realistically how to do this, it's laying down our preferences and it's dying to ourselves so that we can care for other people.
Hmm. I love the fact that you brought up Project Serve because I think that's a really great example of living out what we've been talking about. I mean, you think about letting go of our gatherings for the weekend and going out and serving our Golden Acres community, and there's a lot of people that need it there. And I know there are people in our church that have labels and preferences, have different opinions on different matters. They have different questions, different concerns. We all don't think identical. But what is so empowering about that weekend, I think you're pointing at, is we're able to just let that go and say, what is Jesus's priority for our community? And that is our community. That is our priority for our community. And so you got people like rubbing elbows and working on yards together. There's just something really empowering about what you're doing. And as you're talking, I get this excitement and this kind of passion of what that would look like on a grander scale. And I think if we did that, I think if we were unified that way, our community would look radically different. There is no way that it couldn't be changed. And what we've talked about is that this irresistible church is unified in the new life that Jesus offers. And in going after this new life, we're able to let go of labels. We're able to let go of preferences and just go after Jesus. And when we live out these characteristics, we become a really empowered and unified church. And what we've been talking about today, what I think, this is something that Jesus prayed for us. He prayed with his guys in that last meal, that last evening before he gave up his life on the cross. And I know for you, that prayer has really been resonating with you. It's got you really excited. And so I was hoping you'd share it with us.
Yeah, I would love to. John 17 says, I am praying not only for these disciples, but also for all those who will believe in me through their message. And it's just a cool thought to think that Jesus prayed that 2,000 years ago. And even at that time, he says it wasn't for just his disciples, it was for everybody, it was for us. And it's just cool. And his prayer in verse 21 is, I pray that they will all be one, just as you and I are one. And I can't even fathom what that means when you think of the Father and the Son being one, for us to be that unified, for all believers to be that unified. I don't know what it looks like other than thinking back to Acts 4, what we already talked about, but it's a really cool thought to me. And if we could get there, that would be amazing. And then in verse 23, it says, may they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me. And here it's just saying that Jesus is the ultimate unifier, that if we are that unified, people are going to be drawn to us. They're going to want to know why we're that unified, and then that's going to draw them to Jesus.
There's just something, if we were unified like that, how could people not be drawn to the church? It would be irresistible. I'm so glad that you're able to join us and to share not just that prayer, but your thoughts and this perspective of how to go after being an irresistible church. So thank you very much for being with us this weekend. And I was hoping that you would close us in prayer.
Yes.
If you'd pray first,
yes,
that'd be great.
I will do that.
Thanks, Tessa.
Okay. Oh God, you're just so good, and you are the ultimate unifier. And God, when I think about a church, an assembly of people and believers that could be that unified together, what it would mean for our world and our community, that's just really inspiring to me. And I pray that you will unify the believers in our church, unify the believers in other churches too, but start here with us. Help us to learn how to submit all things to you so that we can understand what your take is on it, God, and what your preferences are, and help us to lay down those preferences so that we're not stuck on them, and we're not stuck in legalism or hypocrisy or thinking that people can't change. But God, just unify us as believers so that we can be one as you and the Son are one.
Yeah, Father, thank you. Thank you for this time. I'm being able to look at this and just just to hear Tessa's story that I know is other people's story, and to even think about what you've done in my life through a new perspective and a new lens. This reality that we just have our distinctions, we have our differences, and yet your love is the only thing that can draw us in, set us free, make us new. And so, as a church, help us to connect first to the way that you love us. Help us to realize that. And I pray for those that are listening this weekend, if there is any question about that, to know that you have died for all, and you make the opportunity to become a son or daughter of yours absolutely on the table. It's as on the table today as it ever has been, Lord. So please, Lord, draw people in. And I pray that you would just help us to look at each other through that lens of love. To love people as you loved people. May that bring us together and draw us together, setting aside those labels and those preferences and going after you together. Thank you for what you have done And thank you for what you are continuing to do in our church, in your church, Lord. May you be praised. We pray this together in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
I'm so glad that you were here with us, Tessa. So thank you. And next weekend, I invite you back. We reopen, and so as we reopen, let's continue to become the irresistible church that we've been talking about in this series. We hope to see you soon, and please go in peace.